When the wheels hit the runway, I felt the jolt in my chest before it reached the floor beneath my boots. The captain's voice crackled overhead, welcoming us to Atlanta, 4:15 p.m., 72 degrees, partly cloudy. I didn't look out the window. I already knew the sky would look the same no matter where I was. It's strange how you can come home to the same land and still feel like you're stepping into foreign soil. In my lap, my phone sat face up, the screen dim until my thumb woke it. I had sent one message before we even left the ground in Rome. No dramatic punctuation, no desperate emojis, just plain words. Flight lands at 4:15 p.m. Anyone able to pick me up? That was it. No big speech, no guilt trip, just a simple question to the people I'd grown up believing would always show up. The replies came before we'd even cleared Italian airspace. My brother Mark, busy, call Uber. 2 minutes later, my mom Patricia, why didn't you plan ahead? No, how was the funeral? No, we're so sorry for your loss. Not even, we're proud of Luke. Just those cold, clipped sentences, clean as a paper cut and just as stinging. I read them twice, then let the phone go dark again, pressing it between my palms like maybe the warmth of my hands could soften what was written there. It couldn't. I turned toward the window. The city below was small enough to cup in my palm, the streets threading like veins through the skin of the earth. I tried to focus on anything other than the ache in my chest. But silence, the real kind, doesn't come from grief alone. It comes from the realization that the people you thought would carry you are the ones who let go first. I thought about Luke, about the last time I saw him in one piece, the way he'd winked as they boarded him on the transport, the way he'd said, "Don't forget to water the plants," like we weren't both afraid it might be the last thing he'd ever say to me, and it was. 2 weeks ago, I buried my husband on foreign ground, a military funeral, folded flag, 21-gun salute, a casket heavier than anything I'd ever carried, though my hands never touched it. The kind of day that leaves a mark no metal can cover. And now, here I was, on the last stretch home, asking for nothing more than a ride. When the plane taxied to the gate, passengers around me started pulling bags from the overhead bins, laughing into phones, talking about dinner plans and traffic. I stayed seated for a moment, letting them file out. I didn't want anyone to see the heat in my eyes or the tremor in my jaw. By the time I walked up the jet bridge, I had made a decision, one I didn't recognize as a decision at the time. I would not cry for people who could text me, call Uber, and think they'd done their part. I would not beg for comfort from those who could watch me walk into my darkest day and still choose to turn away. I stepped into the terminal and kept walking, past the baggage carousel, past the families hugging at the rail, past the drivers holding cardboard signs. My phone buzzed once in my coat pocket. I didn't look. Because here's the thing, while they were busy, while they were judging, while they were too wrapped up in themselves to see me, they had no idea who else had flown back with me, and they had no idea what was about to happen next. The automatic doors at the far end of the terminal slid open, letting in a breath of late afternoon air. It was warm, but the kind of warm that carried a thin edge, like the season was shifting and you just hadn't been told yet. I didn't slow down, didn't scan the crowd for familiar faces, because there wouldn't be any. My steps stayed steady, the wheels of my small black carry-on clicking softly over the tile, and then just beyond the taxi line I saw it, a black SUV polished enough to catch the sunlight and throw it right back. The driver's side door opened, but it wasn't a driver who stepped out first. It was Captain Elena Brooks, Luke's old team medic, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun, dress blues crisp and perfect. She walked around the front of the SUV with the same no-nonsense stride she used to have on deployment, like nothing in her path could move her unless she allowed it. 2 more followed, Staff Sergeant Malik Johnson and Petty Officer Claire Rivers, each in full ceremonial uniform, medals lined in neat rows across their chests. The crowd around the curb seemed to shift without being asked. People stepped back, gave space. Conversations trailed off. The kind of quiet that comes when everyone knows they're looking at something that matters. Elena reached me first. She didn't hug me. She knew better than to collapse the structure I'd built to make it through the last 2 weeks. Instead, she touched her right hand to the brim of her cover, then reached for my carry-on like it weighed nothing. Malik carried the folded flag, the same one I'd held at the funeral but couldn't bring myself to pack. Claire held a small, polished wooden box with a white ribbon tied across the top. She didn't say what was inside, and she didn't need to. They flanked me as we walked toward the SUV, one on each side, one just behind. It felt less like an escort and more like a shield, like they were absorbing the weight I was too tired to carry anymore. I kept my chin level, my gaze forward. The camera flashes hit us halfway to the curb. I hadn't noticed them before, local reporters, maybe tipped off by the base. I didn't stop, didn't speak, didn't try to hide. The lenses followed each step, catching every detail: the black dress, the scuffed boots, the triangle of the flag in Malik's hands, the ribboned box in Claire's. At the SUV, Elena opened the rear door. I slid inside, the leather cool against my palms. She set the carry-on at my feet, then leaned in just enough for her voice to be mine alone. "We've got you." And that was it. No speeches, no rehearsed lines. Just three people who'd stood beside Luke when I couldn't, now standing for me when others wouldn't. As we pulled away from the curb, a reporter shouted a question I didn't catch. I wasn't looking back. The tinted glass turned the world outside into a faint blur. My reflection stared back at me, eyes steady, lips pressed together, not angry, not broken. In my lap, I rested the folded flag. My thumb traced the edge of the fabric, its corners sharp, like it had been folded by someone who understood there was no room for mistakes. Before the airport disappeared from view, I took the small wooden box from Claire and set it gently on the seat beside me. The ribbon gleamed in the dim light. I didn't open it. Some things you save for when the house is quiet and the night feels safe enough to let your guard down. But in that moment, I knew the truth. I hadn't come home alone. And whatever story my family thought they were writing for me had just been replaced by one the whole city was about to see. By the time the SUV eased into my driveway, the sun had already dropped low enough to paint the street in gold and shadow. Elena carried my bag to the porch. Malik set the flag in my arms like he was passing a living thing, and Claire placed the wooden box inside before slipping out with a quiet nod. No one lingered. No one asked for thanks. They knew the kind of day it had been. I didn't turn on the TV that night. I didn't post on social media, didn't answer texts. The house stayed still, just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of wood as the temperature shifted. I thought maybe the world would forget about it as quickly as my family had. I was wrong. At exactly 9:04 p.m., across the city, the evening news cut from the weather to the anchor's smooth, practiced tone. Today, a widow returned home from her husband's overseas military burial, alone, but not unnoticed. The footage rolled: airport curb, black SUV. Me stepping out, still in black, flag folded in my arms. 3 uniforms forming a wall at my back, their shoulders squared, their presence undeniable. The camera didn't rush. It caught the turn of my head, the way my fingers tightened on the fabric, the moment I accepted the wooden box. No interviews, no sound bites, just images that spoke for themselves. Then came the close-up of a single sheet of paper, my handwriting steady across the lines. If you ever find yourself standing alone at the edge of grief, don't look for the people who left you there. Look for the ones who show up anyway. EC. They didn't say my full name, but they didn't have to. In my mother's kitchen, the wine glass she'd been holding slipped from her hand and hit the tile. In my brother's condo, a fork clattered against a plate. In every corner of that group chat, the people who told me to plan ahead now stared at the proof of their absence, framed, narrated, broadcast to tens of thousands. The next morning, I woke to a phone buzzing so hard it nearly fell off the counter. Not from my family, from strangers. Messages from veterans, military spouses, and people I'd never met. "I saw you last night. Your strength matters." Me too. But the group chat? Silent. For 24 hours, not a single reaction. Not even I just saw the news. Silence tells its own story. The first crack came from outside. A woman I barely remembered from high school commented on one of my mom's Facebook posts. An old photo of me and Mark at a 4th of July parade captioned "Family above all." Her comment read, "Funny you didn't even pick her up from the airport." It didn't stay a comment for long. People shared it, screenshotted it, tagged others. Not because I'd asked them to, because they still believed loyalty was a two-way street. By afternoon, Mark texted me directly. "Didn't realize it was that serious. You should have said something." I stared at the screen, as if grief needed an RSVP, as if burying my husband in a country they couldn't even pronounce was something I should have packaged better. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I sent, "You made your choice. So did I." No punctuation, no anger, just a mirror. What they didn't know yet was that the phone calls from the station had already started again. This time, they didn't just want the footage. They wanted my voice. And for the first time since Luke's flag was folded into my hands, I felt ready to use it. The email from Channel 7 was short. "We'd like to invite you to share your story. Primetime, no rush, when you're ready." I almost deleted it. The thought of sitting under studio lights, talking about the rawest week of my life, felt like walking barefoot into a minefield. But something in me had shifted. Silence, I realized, doesn't just keep the peace, it also protects the wrong people. so I said yes. 3 days later, I was in a small downtown studio, not much bigger than Luke's old barracks room. No flashy backdrop, no crowd, just a matte black camera, a microphone clipped to my collar, and a veteran anchor named David Ross sitting across from me with kind eyes and the sort of presence that told me he'd heard stories like mine before and carried them. He started gently. Emily, what happened when you landed? I could have told him about the text messages word for word, about the way my phone felt heavier in my hand than my suitcase. But instead, I took a breath and let the truth out in one line. I buried my husband with honor and came home to silence. The room stilled, even the cameraman froze. I told them about the message I'd sent from 30,000 feet, how I'd asked for nothing more than a ride, how the replies came back colder than the wind outside the terminal that day, how no one showed, except 3 people in uniform who had nothing to gain from being there except knowing they'd done the right thing. I didn't name my family, I didn't drag them through the mud. This wasn't about them. Not anymore. But here's what I learned, I said, my hands folded loosely in my lap. Blood doesn't make someone family. Presence does. David leaned back, giving me room to speak. So I did. I spoke about Luke, about his laugh, the way he wrote letters even in an age of texts, the time he told me, if something ever happens to me, don't let silence win. And I hadn't. For 7 minutes, I talked without notes, without breaks. Not in anger, but in clarity. I wanted the people watching, the widows, the veterans, the kids who'd grown up in military households, to know they weren't alone in that cold space between loss and homecoming. When the segment ended, David thanked me quietly. Off camera, he said, "You didn't just tell your story, you told theirs too." That night, the interview aired at 8:05 p.m., prime time. No background music, no dramatic slow motion, just my voice and the truth. Within an hour, my inbox was full. Veterans who'd come home to empty airports, wives who'd driven themselves back from funerals, sons and daughters who'd walked out of hospital rooms into silence. They all said the same thing, me too. But in the group chat, more silence. Until the next morning when my phone buzzed again. Not from Mom, not from Mark. From a woman I didn't know, handwriting in careful loops on a cream-colored envelope. I saw you on the news. My husband never made it back. You made me feel less alone. I read it twice, folded it carefully, set it next to the wooden box with the white ribbon. Because maybe my family didn't hear me that night, but the people who needed to, they did. And they were already beginning to find me. The letter sat on my kitchen table for 2 days before I touched it again. Cream paper, no return address, just a line inside that kept looping in my head. You made me feel less alone. It was the smallest thing, a sentence written by a stranger. But it was heavier than the flag on my mantle, heavier than the wooden box on the shelf. Because it was proof. Proof that my story hadn't just been a moment on the evening news. It had landed somewhere that mattered. That weekend, I drove to the grocery store and past the arrivals terminal at the airport. Through the sliding glass doors, I caught a glimpse of a woman in jeans and a faded army sweatshirt, standing alone near the baggage claim. No one rushed toward her. No one held a sign. She stared at the carousel like it might give her something more than luggage. I pulled into the nearest lot and sat there with my hands gripping the steering wheel, my pulse in my ears. I could have kept driving, but instead, I walked in. Waiting on someone? I asked. She smiled without lifting her eyes from the conveyor belt. Not anymore. So I stayed. I helped her carry her bag to the curb, got her a ride, listened while she told me her husband had been gone 9 months, and she was the only one who came to meet herself at the gate. When I got home that night, I couldn't shake it. I thought about all the empty airport greetings, the quiet rides home, the unopened fridges, and I realized I couldn't fix my family, but maybe I could fill the space they'd left for someone else. I opened my laptop and typed a name at the top of a blank document, the Homefront Welcome. The idea was simple. If a military spouse was coming home alone, we'd make sure they weren't. Volunteers would meet them at the airport, carry their bags, bring them a hot meal, remind them they weren't invisible. No sympathy speeches, just presence. I posted the concept on a veterans Facebook group, not expecting much. By the next morning, my inbox held 40 messages from people in 6 states. Count me in. I have a van, I can cook, I can drive. By day 3, we had our first official airport welcome team, in Dallas of all places, holding a handmade sign that read, "We've got you." Someone snapped a photo and posted it online. It went viral before dinner. Then the momentum exploded. A retired Marine donated a minivan. A restaurant owner offered free catering for homecomings. An event planner in Chicago sent me a list of volunteers so long it took 2 hours to read through. Reporters called again, but this time, the story wasn't about me. It was about us. The network ran a headline that read, "From Grief to Ground Crew, How One Widow Sparked a Nationwide Movement." And somewhere in the middle of all that, my phone lit up with a number I knew by heart. Mom. I let it ring. The voicemail was shaky. "I didn't know how to help. I didn't think you'd want us there." I deleted it, not out of spite, but out of peace, because I didn't need it anymore. 2 days later, a small, anonymous donation came through our website. I knew it was Mark. I didn't reach out. This wasn't about guilt. This was about truth, the kind that shows up at the gate when no one else will. And the truth was, the Homefront Welcome was no longer just an idea. It was a promise. One I intended to keep. The invitation came in a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Memorial event for military families. Keynote speaker, Emily Carson. I almost said no. Public speaking still felt like walking barefoot over broken glass. But then I thought about Luke, about his voice the night before his last deployment. "If something happens to me, don't let silence win." So I said yes. The evening of the event, the town's war memorial was lit with hundreds of small candles, each one flickering in the soft October wind. Rows of folding chairs faced a modest wooden podium. Behind it, the names of the fallen were carved into stone, their letters catching the light. I stepped up when they called my name, my boots pressing against the makeshift stage. The crowd was a sea of faces, some proud, some shattered, some holding folded flags like I once did. I didn't bring notes, I didn't need them. "I came home alone," I began, my voice steady. But I didn't stay that way. I talked about Luke, his laugh, his stubborn streak, the way he could make a room lighter just by walking in. I talked about the airport that day, the texts that came before I'd even left the runway, the people who did show up. And I talked about the Homefront Welcome, how strangers had filled a space my own blood left empty. I didn't name my mother, I didn't name my brother, I didn't have to. The truth was threaded through every sentence, and everyone who needed to hear it already had. When I finished, the applause was steady, but not loud. It wasn't the clapping of an audience after a performance, it was the sound of people standing with you. As I stepped down from the stage, a woman in pearls stopped me. Her eyes were wet. "My daughter, she was on your first welcome pickup. You saved her." I held her hand longer than I meant to. "We just showed up," I said. And then, over her shoulder, I saw them. My mother, my brother, standing in the shadows near a row of maples at the edge of the park. They hadn't been invited. They hadn't introduced themselves. They just watched. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. Between us was a space filled with everything they'd never said, and everything I no longer needed them to. Because sometimes punishment isn't rage, it's being replaced. It's watching strangers clap for the daughter you forgot to meet at the gate. The candles burned low. People drifted toward their cars. I walked back to mine alone, but not lonely. In my back seat was a cardboard box full of care kits for the next widow or spouse coming home. On the passenger seat was the folded flag, still sharp at the corners. At home, I unpacked one of the shirts we give to volunteers. Soft cotton, navy blue, "We've got you" across the front. As I folded it into a care package, I realized something. Closure hadn't come from an apology. It hadn't come from a text or a phone call or a tearful confession. It had come from the quiet of my own kitchen, knowing I was now the one showing up, and that I would never be alone again. The doorbell rang. It was a young couple, both veterans, dropping off donated blankets for the next arrival. The woman hugged me like we'd known each other forever, and in a way we had, not through blood, through truth. Some people bury you in their silence, others lift you with theirs. And that's what I'll tell the next woman who asks how to survive the loneliness. You don't rebuild by waiting for them. You rebuild by becoming what they weren't. One day they'll watch from the sidelines, realizing your story doesn't include theirs. They'll understand. Too late. But you'll already be walking forward, not alone. Never again. Sometimes life will show you exactly who will stand beside you, and who will disappear when you need them most. The hardest part isn't losing people you thought were permanent. The hardest part is realizing you still have to keep moving without them. But here's the truth. Your story doesn't end where someone else walks away. It doesn't stop at the moment they turn their back. It keeps going, and you get to decide what comes next. You can choose to wait for their apology, or you can choose to become the kind of presence they couldn't be. Show up for yourself, show up for others, build the bridges they never thought to build. Because family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who meet you at the gate when no one else does. And if you ever forget that you have the strength to start again, remember, in this world, there's always room for sweet revenge, happy ending,